welcome to Tech Law Talks. I am Anthony Diana, a member of Reed Smith's Tech and Data Group. In each episode of this podcast, we will discuss cutting-edge issues on technology, data, and the law. We will provide practical observations on a wide variety of technology and data topics to give you quick and actionable tips to address the issues you are dealing with every day. Hello, my name is Anthony Diana. I'm a partner here at Reed Smith, and I will be moderating the latest M365 and 5 series on accessibility for the visually impaired in M365. And here we're going to be talking about the accessibility features and sort of a description of the accessibility features for the visually impaired in M365, and then also issues such as, the legal, regulatory, and operational issues with which organizations may have for providing these features. With me today are Emily Diamond from PNC, James Hart from Lighthouse, and Angie Matney from Reed Smith. Just a disclaimer before we begin, the views expressed today are only attributable to the speakers and not with the organizations where the speakers work. Okay, so let's begin. So James, let's just start with, if you could give some high-level description of what are the accessibility features for the visually impaired that is associated with M365.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So there's a number that are included within M365, but actually kind of embedded as well into the Windows operating system as well. So we want to touch on some of those components. I think the big one for today's discussion will be screen readers. So that's really for visually impaired users to be able to navigate around their system and to be able to interact with things like the Start menu and File Explorer and things like that. We'll come back to that. We also want to have a look at probably text to speech, which is obviously reading out the actual documents themselves. That is, as well as maybe being a component of some of those screen readers, it could actually be just embedded into the documents themselves as well. So things like Word Online will allow you to do that type of thing. I think it's important to call out that those features only work if you've got quite good content to work with. So there's things in M365 such as mail tips and Office accessibility checkers that will actually prompt users to say there's an issue with the accessibility of this. Maybe there's an image in there without kind of embedded text or the alt text within there. So there's some really good capabilities around that. You've also got things like color filters. So for people who have color blindness, it's really helpful to be able to change the color scales there to make it easier to tell the definitions between the different colors. There's some technology to actually flip it to grayscale. So if users find that more useful, you can flip the entire display to grayscale, or actually completely invert that as well, and that'll invert the entire environment. Those tools for the inversion, I see those similar to kind of being able to set up dark mode and light mode within a lot of the apps. You can set system defaults, and that again is going to assist in kind of being able to tell or differentiate between the text backgrounds. And I see a lot of, if you've ever seen that, a lot of the programmers tend to like the black theme, black screen with white text versus the other way around. There's a couple of other tools as well. So Office Lens, not specifically M365, but something that Microsoft offer to be able to kind of scan documents and automatically convert those, really assists with things like screen readers. To be able to kind of use some voice recognition just to call out "Tell me," and then it will use the prompt within M365 to actually take you to an area that you can very quickly access all of your tools within that one "Tell me" window. And then the last thing there is really around seeing AI and the narration around that. So we'll come back to that one at the end, hopefully. But I think it's probably worth, I've not specifically worked with any of the screen readers, but I wonder whether Angie might have some better use cases and some stories around that.
Sure, James. Thank you. I, as a blind attorney, I do use a screen reader every day in essentially every job task that I perform. And I actually have a few screen readers on my PC, including Narrator, which is Microsoft's own screen reader. Often I use another screen reader called JAWS just because I have been using that for many years and have sort of the most facility with that one. But Microsoft, in building a screen reader into the operating system, has done something great because it does make it easier for blind and vision impaired people to access parts of the operating system or access things, at an earlier point in certain processes, if you will. So what a screen reader does, as James pointed out, it will let you navigate around your screen, know what menus you're interacting with, and so forth. And then it will also let you read and edit documents, emails, and other features. And it will let you browse the internet. But a screen reader to work properly does depend on the condition of the underlying content to some degree. And so, for example, if you have an email with a screenshot, sometimes the screen reader may not really be able to pick up what is in the screenshot. And in fact, sometimes it may not even alert you that a screenshot is present. But there are ways that you can tap into certain screen readers to cause them to produce more information on that screenshot and have it attempt to recognize and read that out. And some of these technologies are more developed than others, but that is sort of the basic view of how a screen reader might be used, by a professional on a daily basis.
And I don't know if anybody, Angie or James, you know this, but in terms of, like, I'm thinking about Teams and the like, where there's going to be a proliferation of emojis and images and the like that people are using, Giphies, memes, all of that. Is the screen reader help with that type of content?
Yeah, it definitely can. And I have seen more and more as screen readers are updated, they will have descriptions and labels programmed in for many emojis. So, so that can definitely be helpful. I will say that sometimes one thing to keep in mind is that when a screen reader is presenting content, it can be in a very linear fashion, in that you don't have exactly the same experience of somebody who quickly glances at the screen and takes in a lot of information. So you kind of you may proceed through it more linearly. Sometimes when the screen changes or when people post things, including, as you mentioned, with emojis, the screen reader will interrupt what it's doing and kind of read that aloud so that you can have immediate access to it. Having said all of that, one of the things that I do with my screen reader is I really crank up the speed so that I've been told it doesn't always sound like human speech when it's happening, because it goes very fast. And so that does let me, even if I do have to do a little bit more scrolling to perceive what's on the screen, it lets me get at it a little bit more quickly.
Interesting. So do you want to give us an example? Well, it seems like
Sure. I am going to try to give you an example of the screen reader on my PC. Let's see if we can do that. Right now it's coming through my headset, so I'm going to reroute that. So this, if you are able to tell, this is essentially what my screen reader sounds like as I use it on a daily basis. And for this, I'm going to read through parts of the invite, the calendar invite that we circulated to record this podcast. This tells me who the meeting was from. And this tells me the date, Wednesday, 8/24. Oh no, sorry. This is telling me when the invite was sent. And it tells me that the subject is the Tech and Data podcast recording. And that was the list of recipients of the meeting. So if I wanted to slow that down a little bit, now you may be able to tell when it reads the subject of the meeting. Subject read only at Tech and Data podcast recording. Tech and Data podcast recording. But if I had to listen at that slower speed all of the time, it would be really hard to get very much work done. So I do speed it up quite a bit.
Wow. Okay.
That is amazing.
When you go that fast, I couldn't understand anything. So
Not a word. Not a word.
amazed, like a different language.
I've been told it does not sound like human speech.
No, it didn't. It didn't at all. Fascinating. Fascinating. So, Emily, So thinking of it from a business perspective and sort of an organizational perspective and dealing with these visually impaired accessibility features, what are organizations thinking about?
I think first and foremost, they're thinking about how do we provide an environment to help, people get the tools that they need to do their jobs, and how to implement that, at a reasonable level, how to kind of organize the rollout of this kind of information. Do people need permissions for certain products, et cetera? And how is that all governed? So that's one question, right? How do you make that practical and useful to people? And then looking at it from an e-discovery perspective, which is where I come in, is what kind of data is being created through the use of these tools? Where is it stored? How long is it kept? And that those are questions that you have to apply to each product individually, because each, as Angie mentioned, she uses a couple of different screen readers, and each one's going to act a little bit differently. So I think you need to look at it from the perspective of, is any new data being created? If a screen reader is reading existing information on a screen, like Angie just showed us with an email, that's information that is traditionally preservable and collectible in an e-discovery world. But as she talked about with screenshots or images perhaps that are inserted in a document, if the screen reader is using AI to describe that screenshot or to add information to it, that's not necessarily information that you're going to capture through a traditional e-discovery preservation or collection process. So what do you as the organization need to think about in terms of making sure that that information is preserved or collected if you need it? We talked about Microsoft's screen reader is called Narrator. That offers a little bit more perhaps comfort as it interacts with other Microsoft platforms, but another outside third party application might act totally differently.
Yeah. And as we all know, Microsoft isn't always forthcoming in its description of our products in terms of where the data, what are they doing with the data, where does it go, and the like. So that's always a challenge. And Emily, I guess when you're thinking about M365, because obviously one of the things we've talked about on these podcasts is generally M365 products are constantly changing. And we've seen it certainly that Microsoft isn't always thinking about compliance and e-discovery issues and even sometimes privacy issues associated with their products. But accessibility seems to be another sort of level of that, right? Because I'm just fascinated about when Angie, like when I heard how that screen reader goes, that like I just it's hard for me to understand how, particularly where Microsoft is pushing people to use images and emojis and stuff like that, how that may impact accessibility generally when it becomes less text oriented and more image oriented, I guess, in terms of communication.
Yeah, and I think that's something we struggle with just in general with the rollout of technology. I mean, they always say that the law is the last to catch up, right? So Microsoft is building products that it wants its users to use practically. And they have a slew of accessibility features that we've been talking about, we'll talk about more, that do really good things and that are helpful to people and hopefully will continue to get better over time. But the compliance and regulatory and legal aspects of those products are not always at the forefront. So we find ourselves in a place of trying to catch up again, and that's not a new place for legal or compliance professionals.
And so, Angie, just moving towards more of the privacy and accessibility legal implications of these suite of products, what should people be thinking about?
I think it's really important to consider the privacy implications and in terms of what obligations you might have to a user of those products. And again, to try to develop as much of an understanding as possible of the different types of data that are being collected and how they're being processed. One interesting issue is that as a blind person, I navigate everything with my keyboard. Generally, I don't use a mouse. And then, of course, my systems, my computer, my phone are using screen readers. There have been instances where app developers capture this information, and they may use this information to modify the range of choices or options or menus that are available to me, or make other changes to the experience that's presented. There have been documented instances of this in the past, and this can be beneficial as well as troubling. For example, it could be the case that based on what is being able to be gleaned about how I operate my machine, an app determines that I'm blind. It may decide that I might not be interested in something that it perceives as inherently visual, for example, designing an avatar, and it may eliminate that from my menu choices. Or the developer may have decided to eliminate that because they feel that the process of making the avatar is not accessible, and they don't want to essentially, they know that if many people try to use the experience, it will not be accessible. But the decision of mine whether or not to engage in that activity is taken away if my screen reader use is used to determine what I can actually do in the app. On the more positive side, it could be used to present me with helpful information or hints or things that might not be apparently or immediately obvious to me as I'm using an app. For example, keystrokes to perform certain features. An app can be programmed to announce these or give this information to a user that it determines is using a screen reader. Where the implications for this could become interesting is that with some of the new privacy laws coming into effect in 2023, disability is considered related to health status, or could be. And these privacy laws have restrictions on how you can use that data without the user's consent. So we certainly hope that over time, if app developers decide to offer modifications to the experience based on whether they can determine through usage whether that person has a disability, that a lot of this would be done with the user's consent. I personally might consent to a situation where I could receive hints about operating a program that would be customized to me as a screen reader user. But I wouldn't want the app to be determining which aspects of the program I had access to begin with.
Yeah, and I guess I want to emphasize this because I think this is fascinating. So these apps, and I assume it's Microsoft can do the same thing, is basically based on your use of the keyboard and the way you basically use their products. They're making a determination that you're visually impaired and then altering the product for you. I mean, I think that's fascinating, but lots of implications there. I don't know, Emily, if you have any thoughts on that. As an organization, how would you deal with that? Because obviously that could be a major privacy issue if
Yeah,
Microsoft is actually collecting, in essence, health information and gleaning that from the use.
right. And then I was just thinking, what implications does that have to an organization, right? If is it Microsoft collecting that information about its users? Does the company have any of that information stored about its users, and what are the implications there, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. James, I want to talk a little bit about, we talked a little bit about the seeing AI narration. Can we talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this again, it doesn't necessarily fall under M365, but it is an application that Microsoft are, should I say, in the process of developing. That there is a version out there that you can use. My understanding of the tool is that you can essentially turn on the camera on, say, your smartphone, and you can point it in the direction of maybe you're walking down the street, and it's gonna use AI. So that AI it's using it's going to take that data and put it into the cloud to process that and identify visual elements, and then it's going to convert that, send that back to the phone, and then read that out to the user as well. So to be able to kind of navigate around a new environment, it's almost like a screen reader, but in the natural world when you're walking around, it's going to kind of pull out those details and send it to you. I think from my perspective, the risk there that I see is that what information you're actually sending to the cloud when it's up there. Kind of what can they do with that? Are you in your home when you're doing that? What type of information is being shared? And so there's some aspects of kind of around data privacy there that I would kind of consider something we need to look at. But I think it's a great function. It supports a specific need, and I think even Angie, I think you mentioned that you've used that, and actually you have used it in support of sometimes when Narrator, or was it Jaws, has kind of not worked properly for you, so you're able to use another product to support you.
Yeah, so some really good points. So occasionally, as is the case with many pieces of software, your screen reader will crash. And when that happens, historically, unless we have a sighted person around to sort of call and take a look, we as blind people may not know what the issue is or what has gone on. And as someone who has done a lot of remote working during the pandemic, when these crashes have happened, I don't have a human screen reader, if you will, handy at all times. So I can use an app like Seeing AI to give me an idea of what, if anything, is on my computer screen at the time using its camera. The privacy implications are interesting because in that situation, I may not actually know what I mean. Well, I don't know. That's why I'm trying to figure out what is on my screen. Do I have something up that I would prefer not to go into the cloud? Do I have a sensitive email that I don't, that I really want to be careful about how it's processed? And the same could be true for paper documents. Seeing AI can do a super great job at reading paper documents, and I use that both personally and professionally, but I don't always know what paper I am about to read when I invoke the app. So having a better understanding and of how this works would be helpful. Now, Seeing AI does do some on-device processing. So sometimes I will put my phone into airplane mode when I am checking things out. So at this point, that can be done with on-device processing. But as is often the case for people with disabilities, we have to make a choice whether to prioritize privacy or accessibility at this point. And so the thing is, maybe I don't have as clear of a view into how apps like Seeing Eye or others that I might use will process certain information, but at some point I have to make a determination that I need access and may decide that I'm going to proceed because otherwise I cannot independently do a task.
Yeah, and I think again, Emily, I'd like your thoughts on this, but I think one of the things I think is we're going to see as a theme in all of this is, as you said, Angie, you are making the determination of balancing privacy and accessibility, and then the question becomes, as an organization, who makes that decision, right? Is it the person? Because obviously, you could be looking at client data as well, right? It could be European data when you're doing this. So who makes the decision as to whether privacy or accessibility wins, I guess, in the end, in terms of that balance? Is it the person, or is it the client? Is it the organization? I don't know if anybody has any thoughts.
Right.
Emily?
Well, and I think when you're looking at an organization and how an organization manages its data, right, there are applications that are vetted and approved, and then access is approved, for certain individuals, et cetera. And talking about something like Seeing AI, which may be, as Angie just said, may be necessary for somebody to, navigate through their job, let alone their everyday life, that's not controlled by the company, right? That's just an independent app. So that data is not considered in a company's, grand plan of its privacy and security and e-discovery processes and protocols. So, you know, that is another risk to consider because that data is now outside of what you as a company are trying to control. The
Yeah,
other thing that I thought was interesting when I was reading, sorry, Anthony, just to
yep.
add one more nuance to this, and going back to the privacy aspect, is that there are demos online of Seeing AI, and they talk about being able for the app to recognize different currency, so different U.S. bills, barcodes. So someone could pick up a product and scan for the barcode and find out what the product is that they're holding. Scan for certain descriptions of people. So you're looking at a 30-year-old person who is smiling, and then file that information away. You could name that person, in your phone, et cetera. So going back to what Angie was saying about these companies gathering data about their users, what other kind of information are they gathering by the kind of products you use, the people that you are with, the names of the people that you are with, right? And where is all that, and how is that used about you and your profile in the future?
Yeah. And just one final point, as I think we're sort of closing an end, and this has been fascinating, but I just think in terms of the privacy aspect of it is, right now, a lot of people are focused on personal devices. And I guess these are in a lot of ways personal devices, particularly some of these apps. I don't know if firms have and organizations have like approved devices for accessibility. So you can't use WeChat or whatever. Do they say things like, don't use, seeing AI narration because it goes to the cloud, and for client, for business documents or whatever, we don't want it in the cloud. Again, I don't know if that's happening. Probably it should. It sounds like that someone should be vetting these to address the points that we're talking about, whether it's privacy, security, e-discovery. It seems like organizations should be actually thinking about what tools their visually impaired people are using, just to make sure that they understand all the risks. But I think this is fascinating. So thanks everybody for listening in. This is a great conversation. Stay tuned. We're going to have additional accessibility in my M365 discussions in the coming months. So thanks all everybody for joining.
Tech Law Talks is a Reed Smith production. Our producer is Allie McCardle. For more information about Reed Smith's tech and data practice, please email techlawtalks@reedsmith.com. You can find our podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and reedsmith.com, and our social media accounts at Reed Smith LLP on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. This podcast is provided for educational purposes. It does not constitute legal advice and is not intended to establish an attorney-client relationship, nor is it intended to suggest or establish standards of care applicable to particular lawyers in any given situation. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. Any views, opinions, or comments made by any external guest speaker are not to be attributed to Reed Smith LLP or its individual lawyers. All rights reserved.